Hello friends and greetings for the day. Welcome back to another tutorial on ISTQB Advanced Level Test Management Certification. We are in chapter 1 talking about managing the test activities and continuing ahead with our same segment, that is 1.4, the project test strategy. And today, as a part of this tutorial, we shall be looking forward to discuss on the next segment, that is 1.4.3, definition of test objectives, and we'll just understand what it takes to define the most effective and efficient, at the same time measurable, test objectives. As a part of our foundation level discussions, we have already discussed that as a part of planning, we have to define something called as test objectives. These objectives are always supposed to be as measurable as possible, but at the same time should be measured in terms of quality and quantity both. Because it's not that we define something which becomes unmeasurable, then we'll never be able to define or determine that have we achieved our objectives or not. So these objectives, what are they, what it takes to define them in a measurable way, is all what we'll be covering in this particular segment. So let's get started with it quickly and try understanding what it takes to build the overall test objective. To begin with, of course, we have a quick introduction to talk about it, and then we'll get into some of the other constraints to be taken into account. So of course, a test plan should be defined for each test project and should contain, among other aspects, the test scope, the test objective, and even the exit criteria. The test plan can be set up at the release levels as a project test plan, also known as master test plan, and if required, as a level test plan for the different test levels. So indeed, we do know this again from our fundamental discussions. If not, we can discuss it here as well, that test plan can be generally a single document which can be defined for the overall release, or sometimes can be even broken down into child documents, that is level test plan. Again, the significance of writing level test plan is only that as a separate document is because you want to concentrate on a particular level a little differently. For example, I can have the whole master test plan talking about every single test type, test level, test techniques, everything. But at the same time, I may include things related to unit testing, integration testing, like the schedule, the resources, the timelines, the entry and exit criteria in the same document. And that's what I refer to it as master test plan. But if in case there is something which is very particularly defined and may have different, parameters like entry and exit criteria, or maybe different teams to be involved, different expectation from the reporting factor or monitoring point of view, then I would like to preferably keep it into a separate document so that it does not get lost somewhere in a heavy document like master test plan, rather having it separately managed. So again, it totally depends on whether your organization or your project prefers to have less documentation or detailed documentation, because if you prefer less documentation, you would keep it in one. But if you are okay with having one more documentation which is dedicated for that particular level, it's always good to have, because now your team can only look into one document to understand about a particular level. But again, we don't recommend this for every single level. We only recommend it for those levels which are critically important or sometimes have major deliverables as a part of your project, like performance, security, and many other things like that. Right? So let's get into further. So additionally, test plans for different quality characteristics such as security test plan or performance test plan can be defined. In agile software development and hybrid software development projects, an iteration test plan can be agreed upon. For each release and iteration, the scope of functional features and their non-functional characteristics to be delivered is defined in the test plan and agreed upon by the stakeholders. Indeed, the same thing would happen with respect to Agile as well. In Agile, however, we can create a single plan which will talk about the whole release, but if required, we may have dedicated separate planning done for sprint and release as well. Because release will talk everything about overall, but a high level small document catering that what did you plan to do in the sprint one and how did you achieve that could be very recommended. But again, high level, we don't expect detailed things. We just may have a little scope and definition of those scope items and how exactly the test cases were written, how many test cases were executed, what defects it resulted in. Could be of great help as a report, blending up with the level test plan also. But again, depends on how much you entertain these heavy documentation, depends on stakeholders and need of the leadership and management as well. If the management says we are okay with having it as a single document, then no need to create multiple. Okay, Let's get into the deep dive here, how we can achieve this. So, associated with the features delivered for testing in a project, the project test objective and exit criteria must be well defined. This can be done by using SMART goal methodology. Now, SMART goal methodology is basically a short form of the detailed explanation of what it takes to build a better objective and exit criteria. Okay, so here S stands for specific, M for measurable, A for achievable, R for relevant, and T for timely. Indeed, all these five terminologies play a very, very significant contribution in understanding that, yeah, that's exactly what we need an objective to be, right? Specific, measurable, and other things are very pretty much so simple to understand. So let's get a little deep dive here that what do we define these attributes as. So of course, specific certainly means a project test objective and exit criteria should be clear and unambiguous, whereas measurable means it should be quantifiable and have specific criteria for measuring progress to determine whether it has been reached. Achievable, it should be feasible considering the available resources, time frame, and capabilities. Are relevant, it should be aligned with the overall project objectives, and T timely, it should have a specific time frame and defined deadline for the completion. Indeed, each one of these have a very direct impact on our definition of objective, and it gives us a very clear meaning that, yeah, this is what we really need to define the objective clearly at any point of time. So as they are very straightforward, let's move on to the next topic here. The next thing we are talking about is the project test objectives should address all target aspects of the quality and quantity, provided they are measurable or evaluable. Examples of project test objectives are reaching the specified exit criteria within the defined time frame, meeting the quality goals of the organization, which could be seen as measured as a key performance indicator for the number of claims from the customer for a product, complying with rules and regulations of the specific industry, ensuring the availability of data to authorized users only, checking the functional completeness, functional correctness, performance and efficiency, the portability and security of the data migration, enhancing the level of the test automation, which is, for example, regression or performance test by defining defined percentage, refactoring code successfully and showing it has not introduced any new defects. For example, to remove poorly structured source code or technical debt while maintaining the existing functionality proven by a round of regression test. Also providing or proving the security of the interfaces, example by validating extensible markup language, which is XML, messages against their XML schema definition to ensure the rejection of the malicious data, and finally checking the usability of a user interface and achieving some degree of sub-characteristics, which can be can be done by measuring the time it takes to complete a specific task in an online shop, right? So again, these points are very, very straightforward. It's straightforward in the sense they are very self-explanatory, so it does not require any kind of explanation and justification to prove that what do we mean by these pointers. Point being made here is that how to make it quantifiable and evaluable. The way you should write an objective should be very clear and understandable to everyone else in these stakeholders and also help them measure it over a period of time. Now, each of these matrices or each of these objectives, what we just discussed, are very, very clear and crisp and to the point, following the SMART technology, a SMART methodology, and defines in a way that I can go ahead and do that activity which would fulfill this particular goal or this particular objective. For example, maintainability checks by doing a round of regression after the code has been refactored or a new defect has been resolved. So that would be a point which we can say that, hey, this is what I call it as one of my key objectives to fulfill this particular change or any implementation like that. Further to add here, of course, we have the conclusions. So apart from continuing and measuring of the project test objectives, the assessment of the quality level by domain level experts and stakeholders should be considered. Depending on the project context and the test objective, sometimes multiple test environment with the available resources and or the test tools may also be required. The test environments may not all be available at the same time. This needs to be considered when formulating achievable test objective and exit criteria. So The point being made is just writing the exit criteria or objectives may not be sufficient. We need to understand that these have to be reviewed by someone who is expert in that particular industry and confirm that yes, these objectives are very meaningful, quantifiable, and evaluable as well. That means someone can measure it and can define that whether this objective has been fulfilled or how much it has been fulfilled at any point of time. So over a period of time, there would be some kind of measurements happening, and this measurements should be having no complaints. Thus, we need someone as a domain expert or maybe an industry expert to review our objectives to make sure that nothing is missing here and everything is very clear and crisp. At the same time, we need to understand there could be many constraints which might be influencing our definition of objectives, like infrastructure, environment availability, or a particular activity to happen at a particular point of time. There is no way we can further prioritize it. So we may have to take those also into account as a constraint to define a very clear and understandable and acceptable test objective at any point of time. Okay. So finally, to add, depending on the project context, additional factors would have to be considered in defining the test objectives and the test scope of the project, which anyways we have discussed already in our 1.2 of the same chapter, that is context of testing. So we pretty much know all these things already. So that's all together what we wanted to discuss on the test strategy and the definition of objectives and the exit criteria, which becomes very clear at the end of the project to define as a completion criteria for the project. And that's where we can say that we have achieved what we were supposed to achieve. If we don't have an objective, we don't have a goal defined, we will never be able to determine when to stop testing. That's all from this particular tutorial team. Should you have anything else, feel free to comment below. I'm always there to address your queries and answer them well. Till then, keep learning, keep exploring, keep understanding the context. Thanks for watching the video, team, and happy learning.